All right, welcome everyone. Today we have Jonathan Bellingham from Capon Springs, West Virginia, who's here to talk about his 250 years of flowing waters through the American experience. And we, BANA, we're the association with mission-based for research, information, and education on natural mineral waters. And your membership supports our initiatives, and we really appreciate that support. It allows us to make presentations like this available to you, as well as many other things to connect and interconnect people who have interest, stewardship, and willingness to dive into natural mineral waters as part of the national landscape of health and wellness. So Jonathan, I'm just going to hand it over to you and you just take it away. Thank you.
Well, I'm very delighted to be able to share this information with you all. Truth be told, I've given this presentation in person probably close to 600 times. Just to say once a week for the 25 weeks of the Cape and season and for almost 30 years. So, but this is actually the very first time doing it in the virtual format. So I think I want to check. Is everybody muted? I think I'm hearing some background noise. Okay, I think we're good. So I when I announce this to our guests of the resort, because I do this on a weekly basis, I always have the tagline to pique their interest to say, it'll be 20 minutes, it'll change your life. And I do that as a teaser to make it think like it's not that long, but typically this should take about 30 to 35 minutes. So don't keep me that time limit. And it always depends on the questions that we have. So I'll get right into it. And as you see, as an overview, there's really three parts to my presentation. The first is the history, the timeline, how we can kind of flow from really before we were a country, like most things. And what I like to do after each section is pause for questions over each part because they're very distinct and intricate parts, and it's easier to do one whole part, talk about that, then the second part, we talk about the kind of the hydrogeology, where does the water come from, how do we use it, and then about the water itself at the end. I always like to save that kind of dessert at the end because it's, like I say, we reveal the secrets of the water. So that's the flow that I do with this presentation. So if you'll humor me, we'll continue in that vein. I mentioned we when we're telling history, typically we talk about when something's discovered by a European on this continent, and we can't neglect, of course, the Native Americans that were here, and our story of the water, the whole word, which it's an anglicized, abbreviated Native American word. You can see the spelling there. It's four syllables. That was the Shawnee's word for medicine waters, healing waters. So it was a place of pilgrimage before any Europeans got here. And I did my best recently to take a picture, you see on the left, of the sunburst petroglyphs that were carved there just above where the water comes out from the surface. A way to mark it as a place that people could come and be healed. So it's still something that you can see today that when guests are on property, and I mentioned that they always want to go up and see and touch something that goes back that far. So we of course shorten that word to Capon, and we like to pronounce it, even though it's spelled Capon, we do pronounce it Capon, not Capon, as you would think phonetically. But when we get into history, there's definitely portions and sections that when I make the bold comment about Cape and water is literally flowed through the American experience, it's interesting that it starts with George Washington as a young surveyor in the area. And it goes through the transition of us coming to country. It'll be part of the transition of the early 1800s and some of the pivotal moments, including the Civil War. So you'll see that as we go through. But there's varying reports. Some of it might be marketing related. It's always nice to say George Washington slept here or George Washington was here. We know he was a surveyor for sure within about 7 miles of the current location. But some reports say he and his family enjoyed the spring. But we don't have any, as I say, definitive proof of that. The person we do know that was here was a man by the name of Henry Fry. And he was in the settlement of Winchester at the time, the colony of Virginia, and we came down the mountain hunting from hunting bear and found water coming up. And as they say, he found it agreeable, and his wife was ill. And like any dutiful husband, he brought her here. They camped out for a couple of weeks, and she was cured. And that's when kind of the word spread that this is isn't just something made up. This is a real thing. So after that time, now we are a country, so 1780s, and so the Commonwealth of Virginia, because all the land in this area was owned by Lord Fairfax, deeded him from the King of England, but his last known heir died without any heirs, so the Commonwealth of Virginia took over the property. And the interesting thing to note is that the Commonwealth of Virginia had already had success developing the first spa in the United States, a little town of Bath, Virginia, where George Washington definitely was, had his own bathtub. And so they thought that maybe they could have commercial success here too, with people coming, buying land, selling lots. And it was because of the isolated nature, which you'll learn in a little bit. It wasn't on the wagon road, so it was hard to get to. So those early days were just a few people coming out into the wilderness. This we like to say what happened here in the late 1700s, early 1800s, not much. Yes, the French Indian Wars were nearby, but not in the immediate Capon Springs area. It didn't really start to become a destination until 1810 to 1830 or so, when it became known as Watsontown, and that was the last known descendant. A man by the name of Watson died. He was the one with no heirs. And they laid it out like a small city, like a village. The plan was to kind of duplicate what had happened in Berkeley Springs. Um, and they had trouble, again, selling lots, making it happen. But a lot of people were still here. And some historians have noted there were 5 or 6 lodges. There were certainly places to bathe in the water and to drink the water and to stay. There was taverns, where people were fed, and you could get here by horseback and a couple of carriages. Um, but it was just kind of a slow going compared to some of the other springs resorts that were developing at the time in the Appalachian region. Capon Springs was just one of those. So history turns on a dime. Some of the early reports about the water was that not only did humans benefit from it, but the newspaper article on the left talked about horses. And they said the springs possess the virtue of curing them of bots, BOTTS, which I'd never heard about. Uh, and they say, well, we dare say this Capon Springs is as likely to render sickly horses convalescent at Saratoga or any other springs is to effect a cure on some of the asses who believe in their medical quality. So uh, people and people and animals were enjoying Cape of Water, and for a lot of the reasons that we'll talk about later. So along comes 1850, and a gentleman whose dream it was to build a huge mountain resort came into fruition. He got together with some partners. They were out of Baltimore, and they built. This is an artist rendition, but you can kind of see that it was considered one of the largest structure of its kind in the South when it was completed. Well, when it opened in 1850, not completed. 1851, it was completed, and they had a dedication address here. And they did a great job of PR. They got the keynote speaker in the country to dedicate the mountain house, and that person used that opportunity to begin his bid for the presidency right on the Capon Springs property during the dedication. He gave a 2-hour speech. That gentleman's name was Daniel Webster, which I'm sure you've heard about. But none of us have heard of President Webster because, as they say, he didn't drink enough Capon water. He died the next year. Uh, Fortunately, we did have someone. Everyone likes to have a famous president that stayed there. And we had somebody who was here during his actual term of office as president. And of course, all you will know who that most famous and beloved president of all time in 1853, none other than Franklin Pierce. We always joke about that because people say, who? The one-term nobody from New Hampshire. But he enjoyed the water. In fact, there was a newspaper article after his stay that somebody observed him. They said he never appeared in better health and spirits than this time. Noticed him frequently walking out and riding since his return from Capon, and struck with the evident improvement in his physical appearance made from his recent flying trip to the Springs. So it was also a heady time for a lot of soon-to-be military leaders and other presidents, including Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee, who visited here frequently with their families in the 1850s. And so it was a place to be. but it was part of the Springs tour. This was the era of you start somewhere south, maybe down toward the Greenbrier. You make your way up through the Homestead. You would stay maybe at Capon Springs, go to Berkeley Springs, and maybe eventually get up to Pennsylvania to Bedford Springs. And these springs resorts were places people were getting healed, and the medical community were verifying it. It wasn't just anecdotal. And I'll get to that when I talk more about the water. So I went ahead and we're doing some construction on some of the lodging facilities. So these are never before seen by the public. Some pictures when we took up the flooring to see the original baths. They were of stone construction. Eventually, you can see filled in where there were 32 at the time during the heyday of the Mountain House. Of course, more 20 for men, 12 for women. And you could take a hot bath for 35 cents or a cold bath for 20 cents. And one of the ledgers of the trustees, when they're counting the receipts in the late 1800s, um, were out of the 1,000 tickets that they sold that year, let's just say less than 20 were for a cold bath. Most people didn't want to sit in one of these things at 65 degrees. They wanted it heated, which most of us would agree today is still true. So this is now the big time of transition. During those late 1850s, kind of as things were getting up and running, there were three main factors that affected whether this resort was going to take off or survive. And the first was they didn't have the financial backing to make it work operationally. People were coming, but the budget costs to get it in were way over. The people had a hard time getting there, and so the Commonwealth of Virginia decided that they had to sell it. It was a money pit. How do we get rid of it? And during this time, of course, or Hampshire County, Virginia, or was part of the Commonwealth of Virginia, but it became clear by the early 1860s whether or not these bordering counties are going to remain within the Commonwealth of Virginia or be part of this new state of West Virginia. And the spring and its financial crisis was a factor, along with the railroad, which the North wanted to control, to make Hampshire County flip and become part of the new state of West Virginia. If the people who were allowed to vote at the time in a democratic process would have been allowed to follow the normal process, we would still be part of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so many times in our past and in our present, and who knows in our future, political and economic interest took sway, and so the deals were struck. And now, by 1863, we're part of the state of West Virginia. And the railroad factor was the northern part of our county has the railroad, which during the war was helpful for troops and ammunition, but more importantly, after the war, it was the access point to the new Wild Wild West, Ohio, and so parts beyond. And so that needed to fall in that direction. And the only way to make successful is you got to bring in somebody who knows how to manage a resort, and you got to have somebody who has a good marketing PR. And they found that in Captain William Sale in the 1870s, who heavily invested in enough that he was able to purchase the property from the state of West Virginia, get it out of public hands into private hands, and then finally his son-in-law was able to buy it spring itself. The state held on to the only little piece of land that the spring was on until 1905. So now everything changes. It's in private hands. This was the glory days of Capon Springs and Baths, as it was called then. The Mountain House, 164 guest rooms, the dining room could hold 600, sold out to capacity from 1870 into the early 1900s. People were praising the water. The water was getting international reputation by this point. Um, However, that was about to change very soon. But during this golden era, families were coming for one main reason: get out of the city, be out in the country, but also get their sons and daughters married off. And of course, doctors were telling them they needed to come and get healed of all their isms, just like Mrs. Henry Fry 100 years earlier. And I like to say the proof's in the pudding. If people hadn't gotten any benefit or received it, people would have gone home and told their friends, like, this is just hokum. They're just making the stuff up. But that's not what happened. And medical journals and uh, how much of this is marketing hype? Because I know it's hard to read on these screens, but doctors were saying Cape Water is the best, it can't be beat. These are kind of more marketing claims, and actually, what exactly is it doing? There was a prescription for how to take the water at that time, which basically said in adults you take one glass 6 times a day for on a rising at 11 a.m., at lunch 5 p.m., at dinner, and at bedtime. And children a proportional amount is prescribed at similar intervals. So the efficacy was going to be based on whether or not you could follow that routine about the water. So the mountain house is no longer on the property because it burnt down in 1911. And this is again where the natural evolution, if you will even call it that, of this springs resorts in the Appalachian region hit another milestone because this was the default feature of the dozens and dozens of these historic resorts at the time. People enjoyed the water, but the resorts either a major incident like the fire here at Capon Springs or a flood or economic disasters all around that same time, early 1900s, was happening. And so most of those resorts aren't even around anymore. You can't even find them on a map. Stan Cohen put together a great book detailing where all the ones used to be, and you can find a remnant here or there. But we're one of five that have still remained there today. And ours would have been that future too. The place was abandoned as a resort, but at this point, the water became the commercial product. The people who bought the property at first saw the value in the water, and so they figured out by the early 1920s how to bottle it, how to get a railroad stop nearby, how to get it out into DC, and from there the whole eastern seaboard. 25 major U.S. cities had home and office delivery of Cape and water by the early 1920s, 1924. And this is how our family enters the picture. Our grandfather, Lou Austin, got a distribution contract in the 1920s for the whole Philadelphia market. This was going to be his ticket for fame and fortune, and he was going to invest all his money, all his friends' money, all their friends' money into this distribution contract. And it was so popular that again, it's hard in this presentation format to see this letter I have here on the left side, but it's on the stationery of the president of the U.S. Olympic Committee, who in 1928 authorized the water to be shipped overseas so the athletes could have an updated competition. So in 1924, the entire U.S. Olympic team trained exclusively with Capon Springs water. And it's always fun when you get to the bottom of the letter and you see a signature of a name you actually recognize. And that gentleman's name was Douglas MacArthur. Now, he went on to some other things. By that time, he thought the water was pretty good stuff. And that's so did this clerk in Philadelphia who went into the water business. Well, we like to say he got into the business at exactly the wrong time. Being a new entrepreneur, he didn't do his research. And if he had, he would have found out what was brewing. And what was brewing was the FDA was getting a lot of pressure from the American Medical Association at the time to get spring waters off the market. After all, this was the budding pharmaceutical industry. This is the beginning of prescribed medicine. How can water be a prescribed medicine, even though for over 60 years it had been a proven prescribed medicine? So they felt the pressure, and at the time, it was the era of snake oil salesmen, charlatans, those kind of things, and lotions and potions. And so they seized all the water he had on hand in his warehouse in Philadelphia on a liquor warrant. If during Prohibition, they gave him access to take care of any beverage. They seized all the water he had on hand with one big move to try to put him out of business because they've been trying little lawsuits here or there, not able to discourage him from doing this. And this is where our grandfather had to make a decision. Does he consider bankruptcy and end everything, or does he fight this in court? And he decided he believed in the water enough, he's going to fight it. So he'd show up in court and he would say the water's fine. The FDA attorneys would say the water's bad. The judge would say, I have no idea. Let's send it off to an independent lab. They'd send it to a lab and it would come back the finest water that lab had ever tested, which you would think would end the case. But the FDA would say, I appeal, I appeal, I appeal. And finally, by 1931, it reached the U.S. Supreme Court. So this is where history turns on a dime again. This is not just Capon Springs water, but Saratoga, and Mountain Valley, some of the other nationally distributed waters at the time were all being trying to be removed from the market. So the justices at the time looked at the evidence in front of them, the most compelling of which was, hey, we have over 20 physicians with an average of 25 years experience with water testify under oath that this is good stuff. That's good enough for us. We're not going to hear the case. Case closed. Hooray! You would think this would be wonderful. This clerk in Philadelphia, our grandfather now, would spend the next 20 years being the most successful bottler of Capon Springs water in history of the world. But that's not what happened. He did not own the spring, and the owners of the spring had other ideas. In fact, they created a very elaborate pyramid scheme that collapsed in 1932. Along with it, the whole resort went up. The remaining property, including the spring and the water business, went up for a public auction. Here we are, foreclosure sale. This is the boom and bust that happened during the 1850s. Here we are again in the 1930s. And on July 9th, 1932, on the courthouse steps in our county here, our county seat, Romney, our grandfather was the highest and only bidder for the water. He wanted to keep the water going in the water business and the remaining resort, which had been abandoned for 20 years. No interest in the resort. It was all about the water. But he spent the next 20 years still fighting the FDA through other legal manners to try to keep the water going to his customers. So now you have this dichotomy. You have a watering business that he's trying to make go, which is happening on the side. And then you have this resort business that's booming kind of behind the scenes. And the interesting thing for me is that he had all sorts of ideas for the water once he had the control of the spring. There was going to be, and there was a ginger ale. There was a forerunner to a slushy. There were lotions and potions. He was using some of the algae to make skincare products. In fact, there were testing of how animals would have dogs, cats, horses again, which you'll see in a moment, being able to prefer Cape and water in a taste test. I put on there in the left-hand column U.S. Congress and animals, almost as a humorous side note, but the U.S. Congress, the entire U.S. Congress, had nothing but Capon Springs water in their D.C. offices in the 1940s and early 1950s. And we have glowing letters of support from a number of famous U.S. senators at the time praising the spring water, why the FDA was trying to get off the market. So here he's kind of his friend saying, forget the water business, that's a hassle, and why don't you build back the resort? And that's kind of literally what happened for the 1940s and 50s. So then we get closer. These are some of the examples of how he was trying to market the water. This is an actual sketch on the left of my grandfather's writing, making a natural alkaline bracer. They were doing now non-alcoholic drinks, and then on the right is pictures of a horse that was on after 3 weeks on Cape and water was turning weight, and then after at the end a complete recovery, being on Cape and Springs water. But by 1955, my grandfather decided to take the water off the market commercially, and it's been off ever since. All right, I've been jabbering enough. I need to pause, catch a breath, and answer any questions you might have a little bit about the history before we go into the hydrogeology of the spring itself. Got to get my sip of Cape water too. All right, you can just if you want to, you can just unmute yourselves.
I'm familiar with Saratoga water. How would you compare them?
Well, most of Saratoga's water, I actually had my first chance to go there. I was like, we got this sister property north, and never been there. And 2024, they had the Spa Heritage Festival there, and so I got to go up and try some of the springs. And they're known for the fact that they're effervescent. They're sparkling, which is very different. Some of the taste has a little more sulfur in them. And when I get to talk about the hydrogeology, you'll see why the tastes and how geology plays such an important part in the quote flavor of the water, or the experience of the water. So, and ours is located within a single aquifer and has one experience with Saratoga. But my two-day trip there there's water everywhere. It's popping up here, it's popping up there. They have all different kinds of springs. So, but it's interesting that we share a similar history with the bottled water industry and resort kind of growing up around the idea of this water.
Thank you.
Any other historical questions? Probably much more than you wanted to know about that piece of the equation.
Yeah, political question. Was this during the time of President Hoover that the FDA wanted to close it down?
Some of that
And
was.
what were the politics like in those days?
So
It seems to me that the users of this would be protesting, and the users were primarily Europeans, and this was their tradition.
Right. And of course, the bottled water industry and the springs and resorts, it was hitting at a time where the springs resorts themselves were fading out and didn't have as much political power, but it was some of the water businesses. But they were hitting right into a time that there were a lot of, as I mentioned, snake oil salesmen. There were a lot of people pushing cures that the FDA felt like they had to protect the public. Really felt like they were doing the public interest by lumping it all together and saying anything that's not, you know, now the new era of medicine. And I did find a lawsuit that came back in the 1970s that somebody tried to pose against the FDA and kind of retroactively saying, look at all these years. These waters have been off the market because of what you all did and all the lives that could and health that could have been restored if they were still a part of the market. Now we know now today bottled water industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's a whole nother discussion. All right, let's stay on track and talk about the water itself. So this is a picture of the spring house built in 1920, and it amazes me that this was the first structure put over the spring. You can kind of see. Let me get out of the way for a second. There's the where the water comes up from underground. It was just a wet spot. This is cleared away. We put some stones in there. I'll have some other pictures later, but it was at the base of these Oriskany sandstone formations. I'll have a better picture of that later. But during the heyday of the mountain house, during those 1870s to early 1900s, they didn't think to protect the most valuable resource. It was only when they started bottling it, they figured, oh, this is the most vulnerable spot where it comes to the surface. It's totally protected groundwater up until this point. Maybe we ought to put a spring, a building around a structure. And so this structure celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2020, and it got spruced up. The door on there was the door from one of the original bathhouse floors, and we had some guests help us with landscaping. And it's the only place we keep totally locked up at the resort. I open it up once a week, every Saturday afternoon, and give this presentation I'm sharing with you now. So this is a picture I took yesterday, coming down over the mountain road. So the spring itself sets at a base of Great North Mountain, and you can see rising up on the left and right are two rock formations. These are vertical rock that used to all be horizontal, and that is a natural break in the rocks. And so where the spring house is located, which is kind of bottom right center, is exactly where hydrogeologists would look to find a spring. Not surprised at all. The base of the mountain in between the two synclines, yep, that's where water would come up. So, from a hydrogeology standpoint, is exactly where you would think it would be. And they've estimated the depth of the underground aquifer to be about 1,600 feet. And they can extrapolate this based on the volume of flow and the temperature of flow. They know what the temperature is at certain depths. When it hits the surface at a certain temperature, they can guesstimate back down that that's about the depth of that of the underground reservoir. And so right between the two ridges is where you can see in the previous picture where the water would naturally be a place almost like a resting place and put you in a place where the water can therefore flow back down by gravity to the rest of the resort. And like most places where water comes up, we talked a little bit about Saratoga Springs, it doesn't just come up in one place. This just happens to be the largest spot where we can collect it. We are Capon Springs, plural. There's a couple of springs that forms the Capon Springs group that supplies the water for the entire resort. One of the things that I find fascinating is that is the volume of flow and the fact that we have this Oriskany sandstone, which I guess maybe I'll go back. These Oriskany sandstone formation on either side go down about 300 feet. So as the water's coming back to the surface, it's getting a 300-foot filter. So it has a sweet, clean taste to it. You go less than a quarter mile down the property, you hit a whole area of shale that's exposed where the water comes up from there. That area is called Iron Spring because the shale is metamorphic, has a lot of iron and sulfur in it. Stains things yellow, smells funny, which is good in its own right for certain springs, but for the Capon Spring, 300-foot sandstone filter, a porous filter, is one of the clues of why it tastes so good. All right, this is a closer look inside the spring. The water itself is coming up at a constant volume. And there's not much. When I give the spring tour, I open up the door and they look in there and they go, "Oh, is that all? I don't know what I expected, but it's just kind of a wet spot where the water is seeping to the surface. There's no dramatic display. It's not under pressure. It's not coming up with any significant visual flow. But if you can see in the top left-hand corner, it kind of looks like a puddle circle, and you can see one at the bottom. What the only reason you can see that there's even any kind of movement to the water is these gas bubbles that come up, and that becomes very important later when I talk about its healing properties. So let's talk about the water itself and the whole hydrologic cycle and how it works. The flow rate of the total volume is about 100 gallons a minute. So if everybody can picture a gallon of something, we all kind of know what a gallon of milk or a gallon of water looks like. So 100 of those every minute of every hour of every day of every week of every month of every year ever since it's been recorded, which has been well over 100 years now. So when we tease everyone that nothing changes at the resort, it all starts with the water. It's not based on any kind of flow. It's been recharged. We know it's rained, over the last 100 years or so, it's been recharged. And the other interesting thing is we know all the water we're drinking today was rainwater, but from how long ago? Well, some of the radioactive testing the U.S. Geologic Survey did shows that it's at least 70 years old, probably more than that, because it doesn't have some of the radioactive isotopes that came across in the atomic testing in the 40s and 50s. So without those significant levels of tritium, they know, okay, this came down as rain before that. So I always find it fascinating that when the water that I collected today and I'm drinking came down as rainwater, maybe when my grandparents were here. And any rain or even snow that we're having now that seeps down the surface, my grandkids will be able to drink down the road. And we know since the volume is there and we only use about 65% of the capacity of the total volume for the resort, then the excess flow of the water goes into the creek that's right in front of it, which that creek actually feeds in to the Cape-cape-de-hon River, which flows into the south branch of the Potomac, which flows through Chesapeake Bay out to the Atlantic. So we like to say Capon Springs water floating all around the world. Just like we joke around, it's all through the whole resort. People say, well, what about, is it here? Is it there? We have a very easy answer. It's everywhere. So every single guest room, all the kitchens, all the food's prepared with the water, of course, in our spa, our swimming pool, and we even have a spigot for the community to come and enjoy it. So it's a very straightforward reservoir system where the water is going through pipes. We hold it for the biggest use. The single biggest use you'll get to see in a later slide is the swimming pool, which is one of my favorite things about the property. The water, even though it's been off the market, I've taken it to various tourism events, national sporting events, and even when there's been some water crises in parts of our state, we popped in as many gallons as we could in a van and drove it down to Charleston when they had the spill in the Greenbrier River down there. And I like to say it has a new life in a form of beer, which you'll see at the end of the program. All right. Now I'll pause. We'll go into the water itself, but I'll pause here. Any questions about the hydrogeology or how it's used at the resort before we talk specifically about the water? It's another good pause point for questions.
Are you using any heat off of that, or how are you looking at that from like a geothermal perspective?
All right, I'm glad you brought that up because this is part of what I find a humorous part of how I even became part of this community. And I don't know if it was you, Jessica, or Vicky, who started following us. The Hot Springs Association started following us a number of years ago, and my niece who was monitoring our Google Analytics and our social media was like, "What's this Hot Springs Association following us? We're not a hot spring. Our water comes out at 65 degrees. Our guests would laugh their heads off if we said we're part of a hot springs." And they said, no, you're part of our community. You just come from the other end. Some of our hot springs in Colorado and California, they started at say 140 degrees, and we have to cool them down to make them comfortable for people. Yours just starts at 65, and you have to heat it up to 104. So yeah, we're part of the same family. So at 65 degrees, geological terms, we consider a warm spring. But most people wouldn't count that, especially most of the folks in this community when they're dealing with hot springs are using that for heating and thermal. But certainly we have to heat our water to use it at our spa. Is that what you were getting at, Jessica?
Yeah, and I'm just curious if, I mean, even at 65 degrees, if there's some potential with, I mean, you were kind of talking about the different things that you do use it for, but there's still some heat that could, potentially work for, warming and sidewalks or it- greenhouse activity with some of the new technology. So I was just kind of curious if that was a piece of that at all, or if it's mostly just hydrology.
Mostly just for use of the resort for drinking and bathing and any water related products like our teas and that sort of thing. But that's a good point as we look toward our future because we're a seasonal resort. So the resort itself,
Mm.
because we're not insulated in any way, we have drained all our pipes. Just in the last 3 years, we were able to keep our spa open year round, weather permitting. So when the snow hit last weekend, we had to close. People couldn't get here in safety, but the spa is able to do that. And so as we look to hopefully through other means to expand the resort to shoulder seasons like now, that could be an excellent. Um, One of the keys is the distribution. I mentioned our volume is more than enough for the resort at full capacity,
Mm,
but it still isn't tremendous amount enough to make any significant. For example, we couldn't enter the water business right now. Our nearest neighbor, Berkeley Springs, their volume is about 2,000 gallons a minute. You see the
God.
difference in size. And so they can still be in the water business and they have a whole town that relies on the water. We'd have to figure out some very clever engineering ways of storing the water since the flow is going all the time. Like right now, the water is still going 100 gallons a minute. There's nowhere to the resort to use it. So people say, oh, what a waste of water. Our fountains run all the time. And it drives our guests crazy, especially from out west where water conservation is a huge issue.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate, not only the quality, but the quantity of the water. And we're like, the water's doing what it's doing, whether we're here or not. It's always been doing what it's doing, whether we're here or not. So we're not losing any water. We're not pumping it in any way. It's just doing its thing, and we're using it the best we can.
Cool.
All right. Trying to see how I'm doing on my time. Okay, we're
Is
keeping.
the result only, I mean, is the resort only accessible by automobile or does the railroad still go
No,
through there?
unfortunately, the railroad doesn't do that anymore. The railroad got within um, about 12 miles was the main depot. It came from Winchester. They built one out to Strasburg, and then a serious carriage routes would take people during those 1800s. And when they were bottling the water, they got it to come on the other side of the mountain, and they got it within 3 miles, well, about 3 miles of the resort, where they could take. By then, the automobiles would take it down, put it on the trains, and then it could, be shipped commercially. Now, as I say, it's not a commercial product, so people just, come and drive here themselves. We're about an hour and a half out of Dulles, is the closest airport. Okay, so let's talk about the water itself. What's so great about Capon Springs water? People, a lot of our guests wonder, there's got to be a secret mineral or there's a magical formula. And as I kind of teased in this one of the initial slides, it's a lot simpler than we think. Those of us here in the mineral water business kind of know, and both intuitively and from our own research, what can contribute to healing properties. And for us, it's all about the alkalinity. It's all about the pH, and to have a water that primarily and even though you didn't get a chance to read close up some of the medical documents that people were saying it was good for, it was mostly things involving alkalinity. And doctors were prescribing three main areas of the body affected by that. The first, digestion. So we all know pH very important for gut health and be able to keep the juices flowing. This is usually the primary thing both from the 1800s, the 1900s, and the 2000s. I guess tell us about. Uh, but historically, it's been the musculoskeletal system. So much of what we know about disease has to do with inflammation and the buildup of acid in the muscles and joints. So I joke about Mrs. Fry, all her isms and itises, inflammation, having a water, because I joke, what are we, our bodies, we're 60% water, we're bags of water walking around. So, and the last one, and you'll see a testimony at the end about this one, is the skin. I always say the largest organ helps to protect the immune system. And now, through some of my work that I'm doing, my other healing work is with reflexology and learning more about the interstitial fluid and the interstitium and this whole other maybe called an organ, of the fluid in between the cells and the tissues, how important that is to maintaining hydration and good health. So we're always learning more about history and science and what roles they play in waters. But it doesn't stop there. One of the things we learned only recently, to be honest, about the high concentrated dissolved oxygen um, in the water, and we only learned this because of some grad students from WVU, our major university, who were doing some field testing. I think it was more when there was a lot of fracking going on in West Virginia. They were looking at the effect of area springs and mine. And one of the things they tested for, they said was standard, was dissolved oxygen. And those bubbles that were coming up, we had always assumed from the science that we knew at the time that it was carbon dioxide coming out of solution. That's usually what's been trapped in some of the sandstone formation because it is a carbonic. As you see on the left-hand side, there's the chemical analysis of the water. It was done by the USGS probably 40 or 50 years ago, but since the water hasn't changed, it is a protected groundwater source, not influenced by surface springs. We keep it around, some of it for the quaintness, but some of it is, this is how they would measure stuff. And it was all about how much calcium and magnesium in particular were in the water, and the bicarbonate, which was very high, as you can see in there. So uh, one of so having a water is highly oxygenated. If you look at the waters, and I'm sure most of you do, that are on the market today, they're being marketed and advertised as super waters. The first thing you do is they raise them up the alkalinity. Sometimes they push them way up to like a 9, something where it affects the taste, in my opinion. But at 7.23, 7.25, Cape water is just over that neutral zone and keeps that nice taste. But the second thing to do is they pump them full of oxygen. So here is a natural occurring water that has a high concentration and I think that might be one of the reasons why the Olympic athletes liked it so much, because it keeps them oxygenated. The more controversial one is the presence of lithia. And even in this old report, it says it's present. Doesn't even give it a figure. Won't even say like 0.1 or something. And a lot of the springs, and those who are familiar with some of the famous European springs, without the lithium content in the water. And when we had it tested by today's standards, we could not, in good conscience, promote ourselves as a lithiated spring. It's if it's there at all, it's in very trace amounts. And but we do have, guests who are on lithia and form of lithium who've told us that it's they have to change their dosages when they're caping, and that they tease us. That's why around at the resort is so happy as a lithia in the water, but we don't claim that part of it. We just say it's the nice people that come. But regardless of all that, you still have, and I'm sure you all have run into people who are just say, water's water. That's a whole bunch of, it's placebo effect, and but they will always give us something. They always will say, but it tastes good. This is what water should taste like. It's just clean, sweet, fresh. And so I drink more water. And so, just by doing that, you become more hydrated. And if you're more hydrated, that's going to help your health no matter what. So those are the things that people come and enjoy about the water. I mentioned, how people enjoy it while they're here. To be able to just walk by a fountain and it's flowing and you drink it. To be able to go in the Roma style baths we have now, and we have an exercise pool. You can soak in the heated water, and this is really how the healing happened externally, by doing these soaking baths. And the fact that we make it available for the community. There's a spigot that people would drive up. People drive up from, gosh, all over the country to keep their water flowing at home. There's never a day that doesn't go by. Even now, we make sure we clear a path to it so people can keep their water and come and get it. But my favorite place is the swimming pool itself, because it's 65 degrees. I call that refreshing. A lot of our guests say it's freezing and they won't go in the pool. But now with the advent of the popular polar plunges, for the first time this winter, I've been going in. In fact, I haven't done it yet this week because it's been, as I say, single digits. But I think tomorrow I'll get brave enough, and with snow on the ground, I'll do my little 3-minute plunge and then get in the hot shower right afterwards. But that's my best experience of starting the day, rejuvenating my body by just taking a dip in the morning pool. So I thought I would throw in a few little testimonials here. As I mentioned, I give this tour every week during the season, and I'm always amazed that, I feel like I'm just sharing history of what used to happen. But every year people will tell me, even in quote modern times, they've gone through whatever available to them by the current medical community, and it hasn't helped them. But it was only coming out to Cape and flushing their system out with the water that they've gotten significant relief from both acute issues and chronic issues. And I included myself as one of the testimonials there on the left-hand side, because at least 6 couples, there's probably more by now, but told me after years and years of trying to conceive, it was only after drinking Cape and water that something happened. So we always say, be careful out there, powerful stuff. And so they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe, maybe not. So we can't really make any claims about the Cape and babies that come from it. But some of these folks do. Some of these folks have told us time and time again what the water's done for them. So there's the pool. That's where, of course, it looks nice now. There's no snow and cold. Here's my favorite indoor warm soaking Roman style bath, 500 gallons of pure Cape and water. We dump it out every time for each person. You can put aromatherapy salts in there. There's light music. You can see there's some jets. It's your own private room. You can be in there, by yourself with a friend or whatever. You can't see it, but there's shower and shower products and whatnot and whatnot. And then of course, just being able to drink the water. We have crafts on all the tables, and people can enjoy it wherever they go. The big news happened 3 years ago, where the Cape and guest said, I know you can't get the water on the market commercially, but I'm going to open a brewery in the middle of COVID, and I want to make a beer out of your water. So he got a custom designed 500-gallon tanker from Florida. Someone drove it up for him. He's based in Middleburg, Virginia, about an hour and 15 from us. And he picked up 500 gallons, took it back to his brewery, and made a golden lager. That was, you see, released March 23. That was 2024, I think. 23 maybe. And since then, he's made 4 or 5 other varieties: a seltzer, a wildberry sour, an IPA for those people like it. And it's been a fun little commercial product for people who enjoy water a different way. I'm getting ready next month to return to the Berkeley Springs International Water Tasting Festival as a preliminary judge. Some of you have been there for that and enjoyed that, and some BANA members have gone, and we'll be going again, actually. This time I'll get to see them. Capon Springs Water is not a commercial product, so unfortunately we're not part of this, but it certainly taught me having the master of ceremonies, the main water sommelier, the leader water sommelier in the world, who comes every year and does this, Arthur von Wiesenberger, and to learn what it's like a wine, to be able to distinguish different waters from a taste perspective, to vote on the best tasting waters from around the world, which is always a fun event. One of the newest ways of enjoying the water in our swim spa is something I got to try when I was in Colorado, and outside of Denver, the first time I came through, which is Watsu, which is where it's really popular. We have a facility where people can do, it's basically like it sounds. It's like a shiatsu massage in water. And we have one of the top people who do this nearby, and she comes up and does that treatment. So we're always kind of like, how else can we enjoy water? And looking toward the future, as I wrap things up, it's been fun for me to be able to connect not only with Hot Springs Association and BANA, but through that, connecting with different people from other parts of the world. And I want to continue to kind of grow those relationships. And as we all kind of focus on water, I'd love to be able, I've started initially as 5 remaining Appalachian area resorts: Greenbrier, Homestead, Capon Springs, Berkeley Springs, and Bedford Springs, to bring back Taking the Waters tour. And the spa managers at the time were all interested. It's getting the higher ups to agree on a kind of a joint marketing thing. And fortunately, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because you've already done that in Colorado. So we're hoping we can, reinvigorate the initial talks to get that going. And I'd love, in the next 5 years for the spa itself to expand and see what else we can do with the water, where all the wellness trends are going, especially kind of more of the hydrotherapy, not just the kind of the recreational spa use of the water. Nope. All right. And that's me in the swim spa doing my workout. When I can't be outside running, I'll run in the water, and it's a great exercise. So now I'm done with my talk. Oh, good. I still have time for more questions. Any questions about Capon Springs water? I need to drink a little here.
Maybe I missed it, but why isn't it available commercially?
Well, one of the main reasons is images of volume. To get in the water business right now, it's pennies on the dollar. You got to have volume, and I hate to use the pun, but the market's flooded. You really have to have. There's so many products that are. If we had a premium, which we do, we have premium product and sold it in small batches, maybe. And the other reason is right now we're in transition as a family running the resort business, and the resort itself is in transition, and so we don't have the manpower or the energy to do a new venture. We've had Cape and Guest every 5 to 7 years. We'll be Cape and Guest going like, we got to figure this out. We got to get the economics to work. And we had somebody who spent his lifetime in the restaurant business and had all the contacts in the DC area and did the research, did surveys. We gave him access to our guest list, mostly from DC, and he just couldn't crunch the numbers. And we're like, well, if he can't do it, then that's it's not meant to be. And there's to be honest, there's a philosophical part that our grandfather was a practical businessman, but he was also a very spiritual person, and he'd come to the realization after trying to make his feeling like his higher power was telling him, you got to get this water to people. That's your mission in life. And all the doors being slammed that he realized, no, I'm supposed to be an innkeeper. And so the water itself is a gift from God, so it should be available not as a commercial product. So we're kind of honoring kind of that tradition of it not being a commercial product, even though there's a practical reason not to as well.
Jonathan, where do the majority of your clientele funnel into you from?
Well, as the person who was in charge of marketing for 30 years here, that was my job to know the demographics. And although I haven't really been at the helm to do that the last 5 years, I can confidently say that it's still pretty much the same. Probably 65% of our business comes from the DC metro area, Northern Virginia, suburban Maryland, DC. That's where the base started, kind of from World War II. You could get to Cape on a tank of gas during gasoline rationing, so all the families would come out. And a lot of those same families are the same ones that are return year after year generationally. So, but it's further afield now as those families move. Ohio, Pennsylvania, we got a whole family comes back from California. But mostly it's that mid-Atlantic region where people can drive. We're geographically, it always feels weird for me to say this, but we're closer to 3 state capitals and our nation's capital than we are to our own state capital. We're less than 3 hours from Harrisburg, PA. We're less than 3 hours from Annapolis. We're less than 3 hours from Richmond. We're 2 hours from DC, but we're over 4 hours from Charleston, our state capital. But most of the country we're within driving distance of. And people still come, I mean, just to come pull up, even though we're closed as a resort, people again will drive up here just to get the water, and the water is available to the public to be able to come and get anytime they like. So you all are officially anytime from May to 1st November 1st, you come to the resort, enjoy it for yourself.
Well,
And your guests will typically stay a full week. Is that the way it's
Yeah,
structured?
in the summertime, the routine is still that traditional old family vacation. We're like camp. You sign up for your week, you come that same week year after year. You stay in the same room. You did it. Your parents did it. Your kids are doing it. In the spring and fall, it's more variable. People pop in for a couple of days. Holiday weekends are usually 3-day minimum, 2 days minimum on a weekend. But some people are just in the area for a day. They can go and spend as little as one night. We're the all-inclusive model. You pay one person per person, includes all your meals, all your activities. Think of it like a cruise on land. You pay one per person and you can do everything. Our excursions and that example is the spa, of course, is extra, and we have a golf course, so that's extra. And we have an escape room too. So those 3 things you can pay for, but everything else, the activities. Some people say when they get here, they're like, I feel like I stepped in the movie Dirty Dancing. Yeah, sort of, but without the dirty dancing.
You have a website?
Yes. I guess let me go back. I wonder if is that what I did on the last slide? Yeah, there we are. Caponsprings.net.
Okay.
Sorry, I should have left that one up. Yeah, that's a particular website. And it's very interesting that this presentation has come at this time because there's been a great demand for retelling the history of our county here in Hampshire County. So 3 weeks from now, I'll be doing this presentation now for the second time. Thanks for letting me practice with you guys. For our county who don't even know our story. We're hidden in such a far corner of the county. We have people who've been living in our county for generations that don't even know we're here because we're off a main road. There's no signs. We don't advertise to the general public. It's just all word of mouth. So I'll be sharing that presentation, and I'm currently a backup presenter at the Water Tasting Festival in Berkeley Springs at the end of February. So hope to do many more of these, especially in light of the 250th anniversary of the country. I think, Capon's story is kind of unique to that experience.
We're at the top of the hour, and I think this was fantastic presentation about history and the water, delicious tasting water. I mean, I would recommend just going to Capon, just drink this water. It's very good. I love it. Anyone else? Jonathan, thank you so much. This has been very special for you to talk about Capon.
Yep, it's been, as you can tell, I enjoy doing this.
Mm-hmm,
I
yeah.
appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to being able to, catching you guys soon. Hopefully, if not at the Hot Springs Association conference at the end of April, or maybe some, a great Bono event that hopefully on the East Coast sometime. You never know.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next month.